Hello.
Hi, good morning from EDUKO Pathways, Bangladesh. Thank you so much to all of you who have joined us today for today's session. Now, to some of you who have already joined Professor Hew's previous session on memory, we are very excited to bring you another session by this great psychologist. To just give you an introduction to what is going to be said today, thinking, that's the topic. Now, thinking is a skilled work. It is not true that we are naturally endowed with the ability to think clearly and logically without learning how and without practicing. So Professor Hew today will be discussing on the matrix of thinking clearly, evaluate existing evidence, be aware of mental processes, and all that, and much more. A brief introduction of Professor Hew. Before we begin, I would request everybody to be on mute. We have already close to 100 participants here, so just request everyone to be on mute. Thank you. So Professor Hew Gill is the Associate Provost for Sunway University, Malaysia. He's an organizational and business psychologist. And above all, he's also an entrepreneur and CEO. I would like to thank Professor Hew for his time today, again, for us to have such an amazing session. So thank you, Professor Hew, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that warm introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's a delight to be with you all again. And yes, as you just heard, I'm going to be talking to you today about thinking. So let me share my screen and let's get straight into the topic about thinking. And as you've heard, thinking is not necessarily a simple or an easy thing for you to be able to do. It actually takes, believe it or not, a lot of thinking. So I'm going to give you a user guide this morning to some of the ways in which your mind works and hopefully teach you some techniques that will help you to improve your thinking. So, you know me, I love to start with questions. How far does thinking affect what we see? So what's out there in the world? Is it real, or is it actually what's inside our head that matters? What's the difference between thinking fast or thinking slow? Have you ever thought about that? What's the difference between slowing down to consider something and making a very quick or snap decision? How do you actually think? Have you ever considered how does your mind work? How do you make judgments? How do you make decisions? How do you balance evidence? And how can you improve your thinking? What are the things you can do to make yourself think more clearly and to think more effectively? And how should you take those ideas and use them in the future? And at the end, I'll be providing a summary slide, and you can take a screen cap of that, of 7 top pointers that will help you improve your thinking. And of course, those of you who attended my session on memory will know why I've picked the number 7. If you didn't come to my session on memory, maybe you'll come back to when I do a similar session in the future. So let's have a look now. What do you think you can see?
Kind of looks like a rabbit.
A duck.
So, what did you think you could see? So what was this animal? Yeah, now I hear some people speaking. Type into the chat. What is it you think you could see? What do you think? Yes, so some people could see a duck, some people could see a rabbit. Right, brilliant. Okay, now, for those of you who thought you could see a rabbit, what can you see now? It's obviously the head of a duck. But then if we turn it you can now see it's definitely a rabbit. So actually, what you think you see then shapes what you actually see. So the way that you're thinking about these shapes, and remember, these are just drawings, they're not a real duck and they're not a real rabbit. The way you are thinking about them, the way you see the orientation of the head affects what you see. So if you think you see a duck, it's very easy to see the duck. It's quite difficult if you think you see a duck to see a rabbit. But if you see the rabbit, it becomes more difficult to see the duck. And that's why when I change the way the head is orientated, you might be able to actually feel yourself seeing things differently. So now on the left, you can clearly see a duck, and on the right, you can clearly see a rabbit. So how do you think? How do you actually think? Have you ever investigated your own thinking? Well, we're now going to do some very simple questions. All I want you to do is to think about your answer to each of these questions and write it down. There will be 7 very simple questions. And at the end of those 7 questions, we'll talk through the answers to those questions and we'll see what they tell us about your thinking. So, is everybody ready? Everybody focused? Okay, so question 1. Can you count them all? How many rabbits and how many ducks are there? Can you count them all? Okay, write down your answer. I can see some people are typing in answers. Good. It's looking very interesting. We'll come back to those answers in a moment. So, are you ready now for the second question? So, the second question, can you do the sum? So, in a lake, there are some lily pads. Every day, the area of water covered by the lily pads doubles in size. If it takes 64 days for the lily pads to cover the whole lake, how long would it take for the lilies to cover half the lake? Okay. Are you thinking? Are you writing down your answer? I can see, yeah, some people are putting in some very interesting answers. So, question 3. Who is best? So player A is 22 years old, super fit, can run really fast, has quick reactions and is in the top 2% of astigmatics. Player B is a little bit older, but still reasonably fit, can run, has fairly quick reactions, but is in the bottom 7% of astigmatics. So out of those 2 players, who do you think would be the best cricketer? So read the information and think carefully. Who would be the best cricketer, A or B? Okay, I can see some answers coming through in the chat. Okay, yeah, okay, interesting. We'll see who's right in a moment. So question 4. Can you explain the following circumstances? 2 fathers and 2 sons go on a fishing trip together. Each of them catches 2 fish and then they return to their homes with a total of 6 fish. Can you explain this? So 2 fathers, 2 sons, 6 fish. Have you written down your answer? No, they're not cricketers, but it would be lovely if they were. Right, so 2 fathers, 2 sons. So question number 5. What comes next? A boy tosses a coin, which comes up heads, tails, 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 heads, tails, 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 tails. When the boy tosses the coin again, what comes up? So what comes up when the boy tosses the coin again? Okay, have you written down your answer? So I can see, yes, heads, 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 lots and lots of heads. Okay, so question number 6. Do you know your months? Now this is going to be a bit of a tough one. How many months have 31 days? How many months have 30 days? And how many months have 28 days? 31, 30, and 28 days. Okay, have you written down your answer? Okay, I can see, yeah, 6, 5, 6, 5, 8, 6, 5, all 6, 5, 1. Okay, interesting. So the last question, can you count the birds? Are you ready? Can you count the birds? There were 5 sparrows, 3 pigeons, and 1 crow sitting on the branches of a tree. A man with a rifle shot 3 sparrows and 2 pigeons. How many birds in total were left sitting on the branches of the tree? So 5, 3, 1. So how many birds were left sitting on the branches of the tree? Right, I can see, wow, some people are even giving me the different species. Well done. So you can count the difference between your crows and your sparrows, right? And I'm getting lots of different numbers, lots of different numbers. Okay, so very good. Let's go back now and look at those questions in a little more detail. Let's see how well you scored. So, can you count them all? That was the first question. So I asked you, how many rabbits and how many ducks are there? So tell me in the chat, how many do you think there are? Some of you answered earlier. Right, so some people say none. So how many rabbits and ducks? And for the purposes of this, we will assume that the pictures do represent rabbits and ducks. And I can see 10, 101, I can see 6, I can see 6 and 4. Right, so let's just think about this for a moment. How many are there now? Has your number changed? Can you see a different number? Yes, I see some of the numbers have changed. So some are now saying 6 and 4. Whereas before it was 4 and 6. So what's actually going on here? Well, they're all ducks, aren't they? And they're all rabbits. So how many actually are there? Well, you could answer this question by saying there are 10. But you could easily say as well that there are 10 ducks and there are 10 rabbits, because each of the representations could be a duck or a rabbit. So why did some of us get a different number? Why didn't everybody get 10? Why did some of us get 6? Why did some of us get 4? Well, it's because, of course, the previous experience, I showed you a picture of a duck and a rabbit earlier. And as you can see at the bottom right, that's now clearly 2 ducks in the way that I showed you earlier. So I deliberately set some of the pictures to look more like rabbits and more like ducks. And because when I earlier told you which one was supposed to be the duck and which one was supposed to be the rabbit, that has shaped your thinking. And if you got 6 and 4, that's because I put the patterns in that sequence to make you think of 6 and 4. Where in fact, as some of you did identify correctly, it's 10 and 10. So always be aware of your previous experience. It can bias the way in which you are thinking. So let's now look at doing the sum. So I asked you, in a lake, there are some lily pads. Every day, the area of water covered by the lily pads doubles in size. If it takes 64 days for the lily pads to cover the whole entire lake, how long would it take for the lilies to cover half the lake? So type your answer into the chat. How many do you think? How many days? Okay, oh, I've got lots of different versions in here, as low as 8 days, 32, 63. Earlier I saw somebody said 65, which I think must have been a mistype. Okay, so the correct answer is 63. Why? Well, that's because if the number of lilies doubles each day, then the number of lilies must have been half the size of the lake the day before the lake was covered. So let me show you that in an example. So on day 1, there was 1 lily pad. On day 2, there were 2 lily pads. But on day 3, there were 4 lily pads. And of course, on day 4, there were 8 lilies, and so on. So if the whole lake was covered on day 64, it must have been half covered on day 63. So why did some of us get a different answer? Well, it's because quick thinking chooses the obvious answer. I asked you, when was the lake half covered? And you took the number 64 and thought, what is half of 64? 32. So that's why you came up with the number 32, because you were thinking too quickly and you chose what appeared to be the obvious simple answer. So now let's look at who would be the best cricketer. So I asked you about player A, 22 years old, super fit, fast runner, quick reactions, in the top 2% of astigmatics. Player B, on the other hand, is a little bit older, 30 years old, moderately fit, can run a bit, has fairly quick reactions, but is in the bottom 7% of astigmatics. So who would be the best cricketer? Type into the chat. Right, now there's a mix here. Most people are saying A. Of course, some people are saying you can't judge people like that, but in this case, I think you probably can. Now, some of you are giving, interestingly enough, answers outside. So some people are saying player B because player B has more experience. But I didn't say, and it nowhere says on the screen, that either of these players is already a cricketer. You're making an assumption. You're assuming that they're both cricketers because I'm asking who is the best cricketer. For all you know, they could both be swimmers or weightlifters. They could even be gymnasts, right? So if they are both new to playing cricket, you might think they'd be about the same. But actually, we can tell who would probably be the best cricketer. And the answer is B. Because astigmatism, or being an astigmatic, is actually a condition that affects your eyes. It means that your vision is blurred. So for A to be in the top 10% of astigmatics is not a good thing for a cricketer, because he would find it difficult to easily see fast balls. So astigmatics find it quite difficult to see things that are moving fast. So why did some of us get a different answer? Well, some of us were looking at things like experience, making assumptions based on information that was not even provided to you. But also, of course, many of us did not know what the word astigmatic meant. And you naturally assume that being in the top 10% of something must be better than being in the bottom 7% of something. So you assume that if I put the information about being astigmatic in the information about the individuals, it must be good. But of course, if you don't understand what the word actually means, you don't think correctly. So poor understanding, poor knowledge blurs your thinking. It stops you reaching the right conclusions. So let's now look at question 4. Can you explain this rather strange situation? 2 fathers and 2 sons went on a fishing trip together. Each of them caught 2 fish. Then they returned to their homes with a total of 6 fish. So how can you explain this? Because that's probably what many of you are thinking. Right? So, 2 fathers, 2 sons, yes. This should be the answer, shouldn't it? Because I did say 2 fathers, 2 sons. But I've seen somebody did type in, and now more people are beginning to think about it. This is, of course, the correct answer. So grandfather, father, and son or grandson went fishing. So there were 2 fathers present, and there were 2 sons present. So there were only 3 people. There were not 2 fathers, 2 sons making 4 people. So why did some of us get a different answer? It's because of the way in which I framed the question. So the way in which I put the question suggested 4 people. I suggested 2 fathers, 2 sons. And it's therefore immediately very difficult to think that a father could be both a father and a son, because in the framing, I've talked about 2 fathers, 2 sons. Whereas if I'd said to you, a grandfather, his son, and his grandson go fishing, they each catch 2 fish, how many fish would there be? I think most of you would get it correct instantly. So it's how people frame a question that can affect our thinking. So what comes next? A boy tosses a coin, which comes up heads, tails, 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 heads, tails, 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 tails. When the boy tosses the coin again, what comes up? Type your answer into the chat. Oh, I'm getting a lot of heads. Heads, 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 heads. Oh, 1 tails. Thank you, Arif. I suspect you're going tails simply because everybody else is saying heads. But I did see there, let me just check. I did see a couple of people put in the correct answer, which is we don't know, right? Most of you chose heads. Some of you chose tails, just to be a little bit awkward, I'm sure. But actually, we don't know. The probability of a head or tail is exactly 50%. So it could be a head or it could be a tail. There is no reason at all why it should be either. So you're quite right. Yes, Shifa, Ashfia, it could be either. It could be both. So why do most people choose the head? And believe me, most people do. So why do most people choose the head? Well, it's because we tend to see, firstly, a pattern that's not really there. Or we tend to assume that within this tiny sample, things will even out. So many people see the pattern head, 3 tails, head, 4 tails. And I've actually asked some of my students what comes next, and they write 1 head, 5 tails, because they can see a pattern with tails going up every time. But the pattern isn't really there. The heads and the tails are completely random. But at the same time, many people look at it and say, well, there've been lots of tails, so the next toss must be a head. In fact, no. It's a 50-50 chance. The next toss could be a head, it could be a tail. We don't know. So why is it we go for the head? It's because when we see what we think is a pattern, a false pattern, that confuses our thinking. And we often see patterns that aren't really there. I'm sure you've had the experience of looking at a bush, a tree, or up in the sky, and you see a face in the leaves or a face in the clouds. Your brain is designed to see patterns. So very often, your brain will see a pattern that simply is not there. And that pattern then confuses the way we think about the problem we're trying to solve. So, do you know your months? I asked you, how many months have 31 days? How many have 30? And how many have 28? So, can somebody quickly type into the chat and show me just the numbers for each of those options? So I've got here some great numbers. 6, 11, 12, 7, 4, 1, 6, 5, 1, right? So interesting. And I've even got every month has 30 days and 28 days. Actually, no, they don't. So let's have a look. So some of you are beginning to think critically along the right lines. So this is the easy answer, which is to say, actually, 7 months have 31 days, 4 months have 30 days, 1 month has 28 days, or sometimes 29 days, February. But of course, we can look at things another way, which is to say that all of the months that have 31 days also have 30 days. And of course, all of the months that have 31 days and 30 days also have 28 days. So the correct answer is 7, 11, 12. So why is it that most people come up with 7, 4, 1? Why is it most people get a different answer? Well, that's simply because if you're thinking much too fast, you miss the question. You go for what the obvious answer appears to be. So instead of slowing down and thinking about why did I ask the question in the way I asked it, what's the question really about, many people just rush for the immediate answer, the obvious answer. So the last one of our trial questions, I asked you, there were 5 sparrows, 3 pigeons, and 1 crow sitting on the branches of a tree. A man with a rifle shot 3 sparrows and 2 pigeons. How many birds in total were left sitting on the branches of the tree? So type into the chat, how many birds? We're beginning to wise up, aren't we? Good. So originally, when I asked this question the first time, a lot of you did the sum. You worked out if he shot 3 sparrows and 2 pigeons, what would be left? Right, so this is the answer that a lot of you gave the first time I asked this question, because that's, of course, the answer that makes sense. But already, I'm very pleased to see that some of you are beginning to think more wisely. So can we look at things a different way? Well, obviously we can. What happens when you fire a gun? Bang. Immediately, all the birds on the tree will fly away. In fact, I would be amazed if a man with a rifle could shoot 3 sparrows and 2 pigeons, because after the first shot, all the birds would have been scared. So why do we get different answers? Well, it's because we're focused on the detail. Instead of thinking logically about what would happen when somebody fires a gun, we focused immediately on the detail of doing the sum. I've told you about 3 different kinds of birds, 3 different species. I've told you the numbers of the birds. I've told you how many birds were shot, and I've told you how many birds were left. And so very quickly, you get wrapped up in those little details instead of thinking about the bigger question, what would happen when somebody fires a gun? So, having talked through that, what lessons do you think we can learn? How can we begin to improve our thinking? So the first thing to do is to slow down. Think about your thinking. Be conscious that you are thinking. Don't just come up with a snap answer. Don't go for the obvious. Slow down. Think slow. Spend some time thinking about the question. Then think about your previous experience. Be aware of your biases. Just because some of these pictures look more like ducks and some look more like rabbits, and I told you which one was the duck and which one was the rabbit, doesn't mean that they are now just ducks and rabbits. It means they are still both. So don't let what somebody tells you change your thinking, bias your thinking. Draw a diagram or a picture of the problem. So if you had thought about this problem in terms of 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, or even better, 64 days is full, where is the half? You might have actually drawn the line in the right place. And thank you for whoever's trying to draw lines in the wrong place. They're not really helping us. Admit what you do not understand. So if you don't know what astigmatic means, go away and find out. Knowledge is really important. This is why general knowledge is so important, because often a piece of general knowledge will help you solve another kind of problem. So if you knew what an astigmatic was, you would have known instantly that B was likely to be a better cricketer than A, because A would have blurred vision. Try and look at the problem from different directions. So when I frame a problem around 2 fathers and 2 sons catch 6 fish, think about how could there only be 6 fish? Because if there are 6 fish, there can only be 3 people. There can't be 4 people. So who might those 3 people be? So if, like Sherlock Holmes, you come from the other side and you think first about the fish, not the people, it becomes a lot easier to solve the original problem. Think about what will happen and the outcome. Don't get tricked by the fake pattern. Actually, the number of coin tosses that went before doesn't matter at all, because every time you toss a coin, it's a 50-50 chance it will come up heads or it will come up tails. So the total number of tosses before doesn't make any difference to the question, but you get fooled by the pattern. So don't allow the false pattern to shape your thinking. Ask questions about the question. So many of you were able to tell me how many months had 31 days, 30 days, and 28 days. But that wasn't actually the question. And you didn't ask yourself, what was the question that was being asked? The question wasn't name the 31-day months, name the months that only have 30 days, name the months that only have 28 days. It was just name the months, or tell me how many months have 31, 30, and 28. And when you begin to think about that and question, what is the question, it becomes easier to get the correct answer. And then, of course, think logically, think scientifically. So don't get buried in the detail. Think, okay, if this was a real situation, what would actually happen? So what would logically happen when a man fires a gun next to a tree full of birds? What's my hypothesis as a scientist? What would be the result of firing a loud gun next to a tree? Okay, so that's how we improve our thinking. So do you think that you've improved your thinking? Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far? And you can type into the chat, right? What should we do? It's going past quickly, right? Where we don't have much time to think, right? Always try and slow down. And some of the things I'm going to teach you today are also shortcuts. So they enable you to get to the decision quicker, right? But nevertheless, as you're learning, it's a bit like riding a bicycle. Learn to ride slowly before you try and ride very fast, right? So, okay, I can see that, yeah, you're beginning to pick up some new ideas. So my thing hasn't changed, but I've got to learn a perspective. Good, yeah. So now, in fact, your thinking is changing, because if you can see what you need to change, you're beginning to learn. So let's now have a look at some more questions, okay? This time we're going to answer some very simple questions. I want you to again think about your answers and write them down. This time there are only 5. And we'll share the answers and see where your thinking has improved. So think about some of the things I've just been saying, slow down and think about what the correct answer to these questions might actually be. So question number 1, which was tallest? The 3 tallest mountains in the world are Mount Everest, K2, and Kanchenjunga. Before Mount Everest was measured, which was the tallest mountain in the world? Okay, so write down your answer. Okay, so write down your answer. you think, and what do you think was the tallest answer in the world? Ah, I can see some good answers in the chat. Okay, I can see a few K2s. So, where are you? You are running in a race. When you overtake, you go past the second person. What position are you in now in the race? Okay, and if you think you're on Everest, for this question, no, you're definitely not. Okay, so how many pours does it take? So men are filling a swimming pool. Every hour, the water in the pool doubles. If the pool is full after 13 hours, how many hours did it take for the pool to be half full? Now, this is easy. You should get this one straight away. This is very like the one we've already talked about, isn't it? So you should get this one straight away. Excellent. I can see, I can see some good answers there. So how much? A bit more complicated this time. A teapot and 2 cups cost £120. The teapot cost £100 more than the cups. How much is each cup? How much is each cup? Okay, I can see a lot of agreement here in the chat around the number 10. Okay, last question. So Mary's father has 5 daughters named Nana, Nina, Nini, Nono, and question mark. What is the name of the 5th daughter? Can you tell the name of the 5th daughter? Okay, I can see some good answers in there. Nanu is a very popular name. I've never met anybody called Nanu, but it sounds a lovely name to me. So let's see, how well did you score? So which was tallest? Okay, which was tallest? I saw some very good answers in the chat. So what's the best way to think about this question? What's the best way to think about this? Does it matter when Mount Everest was actually measured? Of course it doesn't. So actually, when we look at the 3 tallest mountains, Everest was always the tallest mountain. The fact that we didn't know it because we hadn't measured it did not mean it was not the tallest mountain. So actually, Mount Everest has always been the tallest mountain, right? So if you look at it a different way, it's, again, don't get confused by the detail. I said, okay, before it was measured. Well, it was still the tallest mountain before it was measured. Think of it this way. I don't know how much any one of you weighs. I don't know what size shoe you take, right? But whatever you weigh now is exactly the same as what you weigh when I measure what you weigh. So if you're heavier than your friend now, you are heavier than your friend when I measure you, right? So don't get stuck in the detail, right? Think again. Think about stepping back for a moment and logically, does measuring Mount Everest make it a different height? No, it doesn't. It was always the tallest height anyway. So where are you? You're running in a race. When you overtake, you go past the second person. What position are you in? Yeah, thank you for saying it's amazing thinking. Right, I've got a lot of people now, I think, getting the right answer. Exactly. What's the best way to think about this? Well, the best way is to think about where the second person was when you went past them. And where were they? They were number 2. So which position must you have been in? Of course, you are now second. So if you've overtaken the second person, you are now in the second position. You are still not first. Yet amazingly, most people, when they're asked that question, say you must be first, because they think that if you're ahead of the second person, you're first. But of course, you're not. You're now ahead of the second person, and they are now third. They are third behind you. So if you overtake the second person, you now become second. So turn it round and look at it from who is first instead of who is second or third, and you can suddenly see this question much more clearly and get to the right answer. So how many hours? This is the easiest one I've asked you, by the way. This is, I think, by far the easiest question, because this is very like the lily problem. So the men are filling the swimming pool. Every hour, the water in the pool doubles. If the pool is full after 13 hours, how many hours did it take for the pool to be half full? Go on, type it in. You should all get this one right. Yeah, fantastic. Now, originally, I know some of you would probably have thought, 6.5, but it's got to be 12, isn't it? So what's the best way to think about it? Well, if the water doubles every hour, the pool was half full 1 hour before it was full. So you can actually think about this and draw it. So you can say to yourself, look, if it was half full 1 hour ago, and it's now 13 hours and it's full, it's a very simple sum. 13 minus 1 equals 12. So the pool was half full 12 hours ago. Now, this next one, I suspect, is going to get most of you caught. So how much? I asked you, a teapot and 2 cups cost £120. Very expensive teapot and cups. The teapot costs £100 more than the cups. How much is each cup? So type your answer into the chat. I can see a lot of 10s and a lot of 10s, but I can see here a few 5s. So what's the best way to think about this question? Well, let's turn it round. What is the actual question? If the teapot is 100 more than the cups, then the difference must be equal to 100. The difference must be equal to 100. Now, of course, what a lot of you have done is seen 120, said the teapot is £100 more than the cup, so you took 100 away from 20. So when you did that sum, what you got was 20, but actually the difference between the teapot and cups is 100. Because if the teapot, right, is priced at, or together is 120, the teapot is 100 more than the cups. So 100 more than the cups is actually 110. The difference between the teapot and the cups is 100. So the cups together must cost £10. So when you divide the £10 by 2, each cup must cost £5. Right? Do you see how the sum was done? So by slowing down and thinking that the difference is 100, it's not simply 120 minus 100, we get to the right answer. That's the benefit of thinking slower about what is the real question I'm being asked. So, what is her name? Mary's father has 5 daughters, Nana, Nina, Nini, and Nono. What is the name of the 5th daughter? I can see Nunu, I can see Now, but I can see an awful lot of Marys. So what's the best way to think about this question? Is there a false pattern in this question? Is there a false pattern? Of course there's a false pattern. I set it up for you. Nana, Nina, Nini, Nono. Right? As you can see, A, E, I, O, U. It's the 5 vowels in English. Nana, Nina, Nini, Nono. And Nunu sounds like a name. But it says, doesn't it? Mary's father has 5 daughters. So if Mary's father has 5 daughters, Nana, Nini, Nini, Nono is 4. So the name of the 5th daughter must be Mary. So don't get fooled by the false pattern. So let's pull some of these ideas together. And here's a summary slide that puts these ideas very simply for you. Firstly, When you're thinking, slow down, take your time. Don't rush ahead, pause, think slow. Oh, I'm glad to see there that some people are already saying they're improving. Well done, that you're learning and improving. Well, great. You can take a screen cap of this slide in a moment, and you can take it away to remind you of the things you need to do to keep your thinking improving in the future. Broaden your knowledge. The more you think about, the more you know, the more general knowledge you have, the better you will find it to solve problems. And if you are ever asked a question and you don't know what something means, find out. So don't let astigmatics fool you again. Ask questions about the question. Think for a moment, what is this question really asking me? What is the basis of this question? So if I'm being asked about how many months have 31, 30, and 28 days, am I being asked for every month that has that number of days, or am I being asked for how many days only have 31, only have 30, only have 28? Okay, so think about what the question is really asking you. Look for the pattern. Do not be fooled by the pattern. Just because things look like they fit a pattern, it doesn't mean there really is a pattern. Remember, when you look at the clouds and you see a face, you know the face is not there. So don't be fooled by a pattern in the question. Try and take a different view. Try and look at things the other way round. Don't count the number of people. Don't count 2 fathers, 2 sons. Count the 6 fish. And think, if there are 6 fish, there can only be 3 people. How could there only be 3 people? And sometimes you might struggle to do this yourself. So talk to a friend. Ask somebody else. Can you see this a different way? Pictures. Try and think in terms of pictures. Draw the picture, right? So if you're trying to work out how many lily pads there are covering the lake, draw a picture of the lake. What would it look like on day 1? What would it look like on day 2 and 3 and 4 and 5? And then very quickly, you may be able to see how the picture shows you what the real answer is going to be. And also, of course, when you're drawing a picture, you have to take a different view and you have to think slowly, because drawing takes time. And just by drawing the picture, you may suddenly think to yourself, aha, there's a question about this I haven't asked, or there is something I don't know, or there is a pattern that I didn't see. So pictures can be a really useful way to think about how to tackle a question. And then lastly, be logical. Apply logic. Think scientifically. So think about, if this was to happen, what would actually be the outcome of it? So when I fire a gun next to a tree full of birds, what happens logically? Do they all sit there and wait to be shot, or do they all fly away? Well, they fly away. So if you think about doing these 7 things, you will improve your thinking. So if you haven't done already, take a screen cap or a picture on your phone of these 7 things that will help you improve your thinking. So time, knowledge, questions, views, patterns, pictures, and logic. Apply these very simple techniques and your thinking will improve. I've mentioned, but I'm available if you'd like to ask me any questions. You can either type them into the chat, or you can type them to one of the moderators if you don't want to ask a question in front of everybody else, or of course you can unmute yourself. Thank you for all the nice things that you're saying. It's really good that you're learning. I hope that you find this session useful. Right, so yeah. Have there got any questions? Have you got any questions? Oh, you're mesmerized. That's good. Well, I don't do a session on hypnosis for school students, but I do teach it at university. So come to Sunway and learn all about hypnosis.
I think
as the students raise up his hands. Maybe I can ask him to unmute.
Okay, I can hear you.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a question?
Sir, how I would not be astigmatic? What's the process?
Right. So if you are astigmatic, you need to seek professional advice. So you need to go and see an optician who will be able to refer you to a medical specialist who deals with eye conditions, and they'll be able to help you. Okay.
And sir, how can I about illusions?
Illusions.
Actually,
Right.
visual illusions.
So if you
Regarding
know
questions.
if you know something is an illusion, you're already halfway there, because all an illusion is a fake pattern. So I love to watch on YouTube magicians, right? I really enjoy watching people do a good card trick. So Shin Lim, if you haven't seen him, is amazing, right? Now I know it's an illusion, and I know how it works, because what they're doing, what a magician is doing, a conjurer is doing, is showing you a pattern, and your brain is filling in the pattern. So your brain is actually completing the illusion. So if you know that something is already an illusion, you can already see the fake pattern. So begin to think, okay, what are they trying to show me? But what's actually behind this, right? So if, for example, a man produces a gold coin. In fact, one of my co-professors here is a Bangladeshi. He has two little boys. One is 7 and one is 9. And whenever I meet them, I magically produce a gold coin of chocolate from behind their ears. Now, when you're 7 and when you're 9, they think this is really clever. But you're old enough to know there's no such thing as magic gold coins made of chocolate. So their dad, of course, spots immediately that whenever I see them coming, I put my hand in my pocket first. So you know where the gold coins are. So now you can see if no man can produce a gold coin from thin air. So where does it really come from? Well, it must come from my pocket, and it must be hidden in my hand. I'm sorry if I've spoiled that magic trick for anybody in the room, but you can do exactly the same in any other kind of thinking. If there's an illusion, think about how is the illusion created, because that will then show you what the real thing is happening. So logically, what must be happening? The man must have the coin in his pocket and he's hiding it in his hand. Okay.
Thank you, sir. And sir, how can I manage my time during the questions?
Sorry, how can you?
Manage my time, because the time is too short.
Okay, well, I gave everybody 15 seconds to answer those questions, which I admit is difficult, okay?
Yes,
because these are unfamiliar questions. But the thing to do is to remember, when you're looking at a question, do you understand what this question is about? So when you look at it, if you don't understand the question, that's when you need to slow down. So if you're doing simple mathematics, it's fairly easy and it's fairly quick because you know what to do. But if somebody asks you a complicated question about an equation, you may want to slow down. So you need to make a judgment about when you can afford to think fast, when it's okay to think fast, and when you need to slow down. And that's based around your knowledge, your own understanding of what you yourself know. So if you ask me a question about some areas of psychology, I can answer you very quickly because I know it. But sometimes my postgraduate students ask me very difficult questions. I was on a call this morning, for example, with a colleague in the States, the United States, and we were talking about what we think is going to have to grow into some new statistical theory, and we don't know the answer. So we spend a lot of time thinking very slow about basic parts of the question, right? We don't just take it for granted and do the sum. We think very slowly, deliberately, and we question each other's views and we challenge each other. And then we think logically about the things that we're saying to each other. So we're doing exactly the things I've described to you today. Because we know it's difficult, we deliberately think slow. So it's your judgment that matters. So I'll take the next question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
The last question. Hello.
Go ahead,
Hello?
Vidya, go ahead. Go ahead. You're on mute. Vidya, you're on mute.
Can I ask you a question, Professor Hew?
Yes,
Just
please.
one at a time, please. Ridoy, do you have any other questions?
Sir, can we get one more seminar about psychology?
I may do one a little bit later this year about something else. Maybe, what would you like me to talk about next time? Tell EDUKO what you're interested in, and we'll see if we can set up a session.
Sir, the psychological disorder.
Okay, that's probably not for this kind of session, because every person is a different individual and disorders are different for every individual. But we could certainly talk about something like stress and how to cope with stress and how to help you understand the pressures, because particularly at exam time, oh gosh, it can be difficult, I know.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. MD Shariful Islam, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? MD Shariful Islam.
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I think I can directly make a question to Professor Hew. Professor, thank you very much for your lovely presentation. You were tight fit and handsome looking. Your presentation was too good. I learned so many things because being a teacher of English language, I learned how to think differently. So I have a question. That is, if I go for doing my PhD, I think that kind of knowledge and that kind of thinking process will help me a lot because of finding out in such way. So my question is that how can you relate that kind of thinking in different disciplines? I mean, you are from psychology, so the doctor will think in a differently, engineer, me as a teacher. So could you please answer me that this thinking process is universal or that can also be different? So this is my question.
Okay. So actually the general principles I've talked about this morning are applicable. You can use them in every single discipline. Right. So actually, the most important thing I learned at university was how to think. Right. You might learn a discipline, you might learn engineering, you might learn teaching, you might learn psychology. Actually, the most important thing you learn is how to think. So how to identify what is true and what is not true. So that's the first stage of critical thinking. Simply apply a logical test. So if a man produces a gold coin from his hand and tells you he's a magician, is that true? Well, logically, no, it isn't. Now, you can apply that exactly the same thing to teaching. So if somebody comes to you and says, I've got a really good way of doing a new way of teaching, and what it involves is putting on a red hat and doing this with my hand.
Mm-hmm.
And you will say, okay, what's your evidence for that? And if the person telling you this has no evidence, you just say, well, logically, there's no evidence, this isn't true. If you want to prove it to me, go out and find the evidence. So at PhD or doctoral level, normally what we're doing is we're looking, like I do in my research, we're looking for things we don't know, or for things that we thought we know, but because of advances in technology or other kinds of knowledge, we realize that what we think is true isn't true. Right. So the classic example of this is Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton is probably the greatest thinker that has ever lived. And he developed, modern physics really amazingly. And from that, all of the stuff we do in engineering, building, whatever, all comes from that. And everything that Newton told us and discovered is true when you are working at a human scale. But as soon as you move outside the planet Earth and you move to the scale of the cosmos, to space, it doesn't work anymore. Right? So Einstein came along and said, well, hang on, we've discovered all this extra new things about space. How do we explain that? And that's why we have Einstein's theory of relativity and all of the other advances he made. Simultaneously, at the other end of the scale, you had people like Lord Rutherford discovering and splitting the atom and saying, well, any of you who have done chemistry here realize that what happens at a very, very small level in the atom and a molecule is not explained by Newton's physics. So you then get the whole sphere of nuclear physics. So we now, of course, are trying to tie these three things together, the very small, the human-sized, and the very big. And that's where modern physics is today, looking at what we don't know. And we're reinterpreting what we think we know based upon new advances. That's how science advances. So you can apply these tools to any discipline, anytime, in any way.
Thank
hope
you
that
very
answers-
much. Thank you very much. So it's a awesome reply from you. Hoping to see you again on different topics of psychological issues. Thank you, Educo Pathways, because they have organized such a very good program with you. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. And if you're going to do a PhD, good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much for your kind words. Sanchita Kuri. Sanchita Kuri, can you unmute yourself and ask the question? Sanchita, if you can hear us. Wait, Sanchita, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, yes, I can. Hello,
Go ahead.
sir. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Sir, I noticed that when I was answering your question about mathematical topics, most of them are wrongly answered by me. So I want to question you how I improve myself for answering.
Okay, I couldn't quite hear all your question, but I think what you were asking me was how can you improve your mathematical thinking?
Yes, yes, sir. How can I develop my ability in mathematical topics?
Okay, so actually the simplest thing to do is to practice. Now, the reason that most of us struggle with mathematics is because as we go higher and higher, we start doing more and more advanced mathematics. If there was a small piece earlier that we didn't understand, it makes it harder to understand the bigger things. So imagine maths is a bit like a pyramid, okay? If you want to climb up the side of the pyramid, but there's a bit missing here, you won't be able to go any higher. So you need to think about what is it you don't understand? So what is the part of mathematics you find most difficult? And for many people I know, for example, it's parallel equations, right? Now, I'm not a mathematician. My son is a much better mathematician than me. He's a brilliant mathematician. He's a world-class mathematician. I'm not, I'm a plodder, right? So I struggled through this stuff. And I realized probably about 5 or 6 years ago that my understanding of simultaneous equations just was not very good. And that was why I wasn't understanding some statistics that I was looking at, because I couldn't work out how to balance the two sides of the equation. So I simply went back to a very simple book called Mathematics Made Simple, and I found the chapter on simultaneous equations, and I went through it and I taught myself how to do simultaneous equations again. And I realized I didn't learn it properly at school. I never really understood it. Now I do. So it's about knowledge. If you want to improve your knowledge. If you don't understand something, go and read about it or find somebody who can help you. And if you don't understand a particular area of mathematics, find a friend who can teach you, because I bet you're really good at English, for example. Find a friend who's good at maths, but is not good at English. You teach them English, they teach you maths. You'll also make a friend for life. It's a great way to learn. And if you're thinking, you'll realize as soon as you start teaching somebody what you yourself do not understand. So as soon as you teach somebody else English, you will start learning what you don't know about English. And then you'll have to go away and improve, won't you? That's the basis of critical thinking. That's what I've been talking about today. So I hope I've answered your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sanchita. Saki Rezwana is next. Shaki Rezwana, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question? Shaki Rezwana, you there? Go ahead, Shaki. We can hear
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your passions as well as teaching. I was really delighted by your questions. Sir, can you please advise us, like, how can we practice those type of tricky questions? Is there any particular apps or book to carry on our practice?
Actually, there are lots and lots of books out there. There are lots and lots of apps. But the best way to improve your thinking is in everyday life. So just walking down the street, right? And I know you may be sometimes locked down, or just watching the television, right? When you see an item of news, just ask yourself, is that likely to be true? What is actually being presented to me here? Right? Everything on television is fake. I know that may come as an amazing shock to most of you, but nothing on television is real because somebody made a decision what to show you and somebody edited the film. So what they show you is based not just upon what they filmed, but also what they chose to film you and which bits they left out. So when you're looking at a news story, just begin to ask yourself, does this sound true to me? Logically, is this true? Does this fit with other bits of information that I know? So does it fit with my other knowledge? What do I want to understand about this? What does it mean to me? What, for example, do I think is being told to me? Does that seem to me to be true? And if you start thinking like this, your thinking will begin to improve, right? So most of us, I'm afraid, walk through life never really thinking about much at all. We just accept the things around us. But you have the opportunity to look at anything and ask a question. And then you instantly, when you do that, you start thinking. Similarly, if you're reading a good book, right? We've all seen books or films that are not very good because what happens in them doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem sensible. Would people really behave like that? So why not engage your critical faculties when you're watching your next Hollywood film and think, is that really how people are? And begin to think. I actually find it's quite fun. My kids used to love this. We would go and sit and watch the latest film in the cinema and they would start pointing out all the things that were clearly wrong. And it became fun. It became very fun. So you can do that as well. There are loads of ways for you to practice, but switch your brain on every day is by far the best way. So I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thing is that we have to be very inquisitive for everything.
Yes.
Thank you,
yes.
sir.
Always be inquisitive. The way that humanity advances is by asking, how can we do this better? How can we do this differently? Is this the best way? Is there something we don't know? Right? I've got behind me a wonderful picture of Sunway University and bits of Sunway City. Think about it. Humanity has gone from literally living in very small buildings to this in what, 6,000 years? That's a really tiny time. And we've got there by people being inquisitive, by asking, can we do this better? Is there a better way? Can we do that? Why don't we try this? So it's that kind of thinking that's made us so successful as humans.
Next, we'll
Thanks
have a
again,
question.
sir. I got my phone.
Great, thank you for your question. Mohammed Mohiuddin, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Mohammed Mohiuddin.
Thank you very much. Hello, sir.
Hello.
So my question is, when we are under pressure, so for example, we are taking a picture like GMAT, I'm planning for a GMAT. So there'll be a lot of pressure of time. So how can I stay calm and think on about that time prepared?
Okay, that's a slightly different question. We're a bit off topic here. I might come back. I think probably stress would be something I'd be happy to come back and talk about in a bit more detail in the future, if that's something you guys tell EDUKO you'd like me to do. All I would say is preparation, make time, and identify very quickly what you find hardest and focus on that. Because one of the things that we tend to do is we do the things we find easiest. This is the basis of procrastination. If you've never heard that word, let me explain. That is not doing what you should be doing and doing something else. So many people will sit down and they'll do the easy GMAT questions, the ones they like, or they'll start tidying their desk, or they'll start sharpening their pencils. No, be honest with yourself. Know that you can't do this. Decide that's what I'm going to focus on, and make sure you make time to do the things that you find most difficult. As you get better, you'll feel less stressed. You'll get better and you'll like it more, and you'll get even better. It's amazing. Once you start working on something, you begin to understand it, you find you're better at it, you begin to enjoy it, and become less stressed. Then you move on to the next thing that you find more difficult. And I'm sure you'll do fine. How long before you're going to take the GMAT? Gone quiet.
Okay, so we'll go to our next question. We have plenty and a very short time. Rajat Goswami, can you please unmute yourself and ask your question in a short manner? Professor Hew. Rajat Goswami.
Thank you. Greetings, Professor. I just want to ask a short question about affective filter while we are learning a new language. So what should be our psychology and how to break that affective filter so that we can learn it swiftly and easily?
Oh gosh, now that's a really big one. How can I say this nicely? The way in which language is taught does not line up with the psychology. So the psychology tells us that the way people learn languages is not generally the way that languages are taught. So nobody ever sits down with a 3-year-old child and says, you must learn all these verbs and you must conjugate these verbs. So the way that we learn things, particularly around language, is what we call comprehensible input. Not my term, but it sums up basically, do I begin to understand it? So the way I begin to learn a language is by reading children's books. Okay, so saya belajar bahasa Melayu, and what do? I read children's books. So I go out and I find a very simple book that tells a very simple story with pictures, and I begin to learn the words, and I say the words to myself out loud. And then what I try and do is begin to listen to TV or to radio or to films, and then to find people who will speak the language to me. The problem I have, and that you may have, is that very few people speak to me like I'm 4 years old. So I will say to them, saya 4 tahun, or even 3 tahun, 3 years old, and they will still speak to me in English. But if you can find somebody who will speak to you in the language you're trying to learn, as though you are a child, you will do a lot better, because what you need them to do is correct you in that language. So, for example, I'm sitting here in Malaya Major, in Chinese, a table, okay? And if I were speaking as a child to a Malay speaker, and I were to say, kawan, friend, they wouldn't say to me in English, no, this is a table. They would correct me very simply in the language that I'm trying to speak. And that's what comprehensible input is. And your brain will magically begin to open. Your brain will actually begin to understand the circumstances in which words are being used. And you begin to identify patterns. That's one of the reasons your brain is set up to recognize patterns as language. So the best way to learn is start with children's books, listen to other people speaking the language in a context you understand, so it's comprehensible. Even if you don't understand a word, just listen. Just listen, read the books to yourself out loud, and then find somebody who speaks that language to speak to you like you're 3 or 4 years old. And very quickly, you'll begin to learn it. Then finally, total immersion. So then you need to go somewhere where the people speak the language and they only speak to you in that language, and you'll be fluent very quickly. This is why when students, for example, come to Sunway, we have a lot of Chinese and we have Bangladeshi students come, for example. The only language they share is English. So all of our students speak in English, and very quickly their English improves because it's comprehensible input outside the classroom. They're talking, about let's have some noodles together. Let's have a drink. And very quickly, obviously, your brain works out what's being talked about. And so we watch them learn the language here amazingly quickly, even if their language isn't too good when they arrive. I hope that's been useful for all you language learners.
Right. So next is Farhana Yasmin. Farhana, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question to Professor Hew? Farhana Yasmin.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Sir, actually, I want to, many times due to a lack of confidence, we can't share even knowing the correct answer. What to do in this case? Please say it.
So a very quick, simple top tip here. So can you stand up for me? Are you standing up? I'm serious, stand up. Okay. Take your hands, put them on your hips. I want you now to take 3 deep breaths. You can all try this as well if you're watching. So, every day, in every way, I get better and better. Say it with me. Every day, in every way, I get better and better. Do you feel better? Do you
Yes,
feel
sir.
more confident? Yeah, you do. So next time when you feel that you're maybe not able to do something, do the superhero pose. Take 3 deep breaths and just remind yourself, every day, in every way, I get better and better. And you will, and you'll be more and more confident. Thank you for your question.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Tahsin is next. Mr. Tahsin, can you please unmute yourself and ask the question to Dr. Hew? Mr. Tahsin.
Thank you so much. Hello, Professor Hew. It's really honorable for me to be present here with you and interacting here today. So I want to ask a simple question, which I have been thinking quite lately, which is, does interacting more helps us to change the way we think? Our mind works actually.
I'm sorry, I lost you in the middle of the question there. Could you repeat the question, please?
Does interacting more have the way, our way of thinking?
I'm sorry, I'm really
So
struggling.
let me help. I think I got what he's saying. He's saying, like, if we interact more with people, does that help us in thinking better? Does that have any impact on our thinking?
Yes and no. Okay, it depends on who you interact with, right? So if you spend your life with the same people every day, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to think anything original or new. Unless, of course, they're really clever people, right? So one of the great things about being in a university is you are surrounded by lots of very clever people who are thinking lots of crazy things. So we have, for example, a postgraduate society here, and certainly say at Oxford, in the common room, the middle common room where all the postgraduates are. It's just sometimes good to go and sit there and drink a cup of tea and listen, because they will be talking about a problem that they're solving in their own research. And you may suddenly overhear an approach that you didn't know about, a new way of doing something. Similarly, though, you may know a new way. So if you meet new people, they will teach you new things. They will make you think about new things. This is one of the great things about travel, which is why the last year has been so terrible. I love being in Asia because every day I encounter something new and different to being British, right? Even though I come from a part of the UK that's got large numbers, for example, of Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis, right? There are still things I learn that are new by meeting new and different people, and they make me think about things in a different way. So try and interact with as many different people as you can. And if you're interested in something in particular, so if you're interested in learning English or music or chess or chemistry or whatever, go and find other people who are interested. And because you share that interest, you'll begin to talk to each other. And very quickly, you'll begin to identify things that you know, but things you don't know, but they know. And you can begin to share. And together, you begin to build the pyramid. You begin to build the pyramid of understanding. You begin to understand more because people are talking to you about something you care about and they care about. And they may have read a book that you haven't, and they can tell you what's in it. And you can then ask them questions, which makes them think. They then realize what they don't know. So they have to either ask you or go away and learn it somewhere else. Then when they come back, they tell you what they have learned. And that's how the process works. So yeah, interacting with other people, lots of different people, is by far the best way to improve your thinking and indeed improve your life overall. There is a lot of evidence, empirical evidence. If you have good friends and you're involved in activities outside your family, you will live longer. So it actually pays dividends in the end in terms of your life. You'll be happier and you'll live longer.
Next, we have a question from MD Imon Hussain. MD Imon Hussain,
Sure.
please unmute yourself.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, MD
Yeah,
Imon
so
Hussain.
we'll take the last question from Safia, please.
Okay.
Professor Hew, this is the last question. We know that we are running out of time. So we'll take the last question from Safia, please. Safia, can you please unmute yourself? Safia, are you there?
Safia, if you can hear us, please unmute yourself.
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Hello.
So firstly, I really love the way you explained all the things to us. Like, it's my first time hearing you. And going back to my question is that the session you had a time ago about thinking differently. So I've always tried to think differently from other people, because you have to. I felt like I had to. So most of the time it happens that it turns into overthinking, and it really stresses me out. And then I tell my friends that I'm thinking about this, and they say, no, stop it, you're just overthinking. I don't know, like, I'm thinking, but it turns into overthinking, and I really don't know where to stop, when to stop. So is there any way I can help myself with it?
Okay, well, the first thing to say is you are not alone. We all overthink. All of us do, right? And let me say to everybody, if you don't sometimes have times when you overthink, then I'm a little bit worried about you, right? Because overthinking serves a really valuable purpose. So I talked earlier about not being fooled by patterns. And the reason we tend to overthink is because we don't understand what happened. We're trying to work out if there is a pattern to what happened. So normally we tend to overthink about things that happen to us socially, right? So this may amaze you, but one of my most vivid memories is I went, and think about this, this is 40 years ago now. I went to a birthday party, an 18 birthday party for a young woman I was friendly with. And I made a joke, and it wasn't a very clever joke. It was rude, actually. It turned out rude. And I still think about it. Still occasionally I think, oh gosh, I can't believe it. I said this at somebody's birthday party. It was meant to be funny, it didn't come out right. Now, that could have been overthinking, but what I realize is the reason I think about it is it warns me. I've learned the lesson, right? Never again am I going to make a silly joke like that, right? I will now think about it. So what you need to do with the overthinking is say to yourself, okay, I'm thinking about this. Why? Well, I'm thinking because I'm bothered. It worries me. So what am I actually worried about? I'm overthinking this because I'm worried that this may happen or this did happen. Okay, so what have I learned? What do I do? Okay, so if I'm worried about something tomorrow, I'm anxious and I'm overthinking what may happen, what do I actually want the outcome to be? So what am I doing this tomorrow to achieve? And once I know what that is, it's a matter of saying to yourself, okay, based upon what I already know, what is the best way for me to go forward to get what I want to achieve? But if you're looking backwards, say to yourself, okay, I made a mistake. What did I learn from that? How will I not make that mistake again in the future? Now, some of these memories will stay with you forever, I'm afraid. And I've always said to myself, if I ever meet that young woman again, I will apologize for the bad joke. But she's probably forgotten it. It's probably passed her by. But I learned a very valuable lesson from thinking. So think about the lesson, think about what you want to achieve, then you can stop overthinking. I hope that's answered your question. But
Yes, thank you.
Let me repeat.
I really did understand.
Yeah, if it would be useful in the future to maybe come back and talk about things like stress and how you deal with stress and confidence and so on, let EDUKO know, and I'd be happy to think about that. So you tell EDUKO what you'd like me to come and talk about, and if I can, I will.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Hew, so much. You know what? I wish these sessions were 3 hours long, you know, because I want to hear.
I get bored of me. Even I get bored of me.
Thank you so much. We are really looking forward to something like this, because I really want to hear all of these questions from Rafsan, from Farhia, Pooja, because these questions actually, once it comes up, it shows like we also struggle with something like that, like overthinking. It happens every day in our lives, in every moment, and sometimes we take the worst of decisions while we overthink, and sometimes we don't think at all. So, but we are it's almost 24 minutes away past our due time. So I would like to apologize to everyone who have raised their hands. There's still 9-10 questions. We are really sorry we cannot answer them all here. But again, the link to our Facebook page is there. It always helps us to have you guys on our page, follow what next session we're going to have. And of course, I would take this opportunity to thank Apple Gomez of Sunway University, and of course, Professor Hew Gill, for arranging such sessions like this. Our ulterior motive is to share the knowledge of such great minds from across the world. I hope that these sessions really helped you. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining in this session. Of course, we are going to ask Professor Hew again, maybe in the next 1 month or so, to come back with another exciting session. We love you, Professor Hew, and every session that you do. Thanking all of you here, I'll close the meeting for today. Thank you for all coming here.